Hey guys, so today let's talk about 3 tricks that you can do when you're practicing with a metronome. I find that these approaches will make your playing and improvising much more consistent, and it will also make your time feel much better. And just before we jump into that, I want to let you all know that we just released a practicing standards masterclass with jazz lesson videos. And in that masterclass, I talk about my step-by-step process for working on jazz standards. It's got over a full hour of content, and it comes with a PDF as well. So it's going to be a great resource to check out. And if you want to get that download, just make sure to use coupon code JLV10, which will get you $10 off any masterclass at the Jazz Lesson Videos store this week. But right now, let's jump into these metronome tricks. And the first trick is going to be using the metronome on as few beats as possible. So this is a really important approach to using the metronome, and the challenge with this approach all comes down to internal time. It will definitely be a huge revelation for you if you haven't tried this already, to realize how much you might be relying on the metronome giving you every single beat or every single quarter note when you're practicing with the metronome. You could be able to nail an exercise at 180 beats per minute, but as soon as you take it down to 90 beats per minute and you just give yourself the half note as opposed to the quarter note, or better yet, if you take it all the way down to 45 beats per minute and you just give yourself the whole note, you might find that you're really going to struggle to keep the time consistent. And that's exactly why this exercise is so beneficial. It's really going to develop your internal pulse. And the stronger your internal pulse is, the more consistent your time is going to be, and the stronger your time feel will become. A huge element of groove and time feel is just consistency of time. So a strong and consistent pulse is going to be a huge part of what makes your time feel really good. So I'm going to do 2 examples of using the metronome like this. For one example, I'm going to play a technical exercise, and for the other example, I'm just going to blow over a tune. So let's start with the exercise first. This is a compound melodic cell exercise from my book on the concept of melodic cells. This concept is great for technique building, and you'll see this exercise creates a really cool effect when we put together 2 melodic cells and move that shape up in half step. First, I'm going to play this example with a metronome clicking on every single quarter note. Then I'm going to move it down to the half note and then the whole note. So as I subtract the amount of beats that the metronome is clicking for me, I'm going to have to rely on my own internal pulse to be consistent. I might even try the exercise with the metronome just giving me, I guess, a double whole note. I don't know if that's a thing. But essentially, I'll just have the metronome clicking on beat 1 of every 2 bars. So again, what happens is I have to provide the internal pulse as I'm getting fewer and fewer beats provided by the metronome. Now I'll just apply this to a tune. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play Donna Lee at 256 beats per minute. But all I'm going to get from the metronome is a click at 16 beats per minute. So what that means is the metronome will be giving me beat 1 of every 4 bars. So if you haven't figured it out already, all I'm doing is I'm just dividing the number in 2, and then the metronome will give me half as many beats. And you can keep on challenging yourself to do that as much as possible. Beat 1 of every 4 bars is pretty tough, so this might just be kind of like an ultimate goal for you. So you'll notice with this exercise throughout, when I was taking away the beats that the metronome was giving me, I was having the metronome click on 1 and 3, and then just 1, not 2 and 4, and then just 2. Both methods are great ways to go about using the metronome, but this is going to bring me to trick number 2. Trick number 2 is don't get stuck with just practicing the metronome on beats 2 and 4. So this one really gets into time feel and not just time. I've found that a lot of developing players end up having an over-exaggerated swing feel when they're working on their phrasing in jazz. And I think that's caused by a couple of myths that have been established in traditional jazz education. Now, before we get into that, it is important to acknowledge and understand that the definition of a good jazz swing feel is somewhat subjective, but I always default to the source of the legends of this music, and I'll elaborate on that in just a bit. So one element of a swing feel myth, before we get to this metronome trick, is the element of articulation. And there is this myth in traditional jazz education, as you're starting out and developing a jazz feel, there's this myth that you should just be articulating or tonguing the offbeats. Now the reality is the legends of this music would articulate a lot on the downbeats, particularly when the shape of a line is going up. Now back to the metronome thing, and I'm going to play examples to further analyze these approaches. So it's also a misconception or a myth that in jazz we put all of our weight on beats 2 and 4. Now the reality is that beats 2 and 4 should not necessarily get any more weight or accent or emphasis than beats 1 and 3 do. There are many different types of ways to feel swing, and it might depend on the specific line or phrase that you're playing, and it also might depend on the type of swing groove that is being played. So the risk here is that if you get stuck practicing with the metronome on just beats 2 and 4, you might start to develop a lopsided swing feel because you might lose sight of how the other beats should feel, and you might just get stuck really putting all your weight into beats 2 and 4. For example, beats 1 and 3 are most often where the chords are changing and where the bass player is playing the roots of the chords. So there's a certain weight that comes to beats 1 and 3 that we don't really feel on beats 2 and 4, just by nature of those chords changing and how the chords are outlined on 1 and 3. In fact, if you're the soloist, even the notes that you play on 1 and 3, a lot of times will be landing points to outlining the harmony. In other words, on beat 1 and 3, we might be playing very strong chord tones. And so those chord tones should probably be leaned into and get some nice weight or even an accent, even if we're not specifically tonguing those notes. So here's an example of an overly exaggerated swing feel, or we could call it a myth-based swing feel. I'm going to exaggerate here and play a line with only offbeat articulation, and I'm really going to lean into beats 2 and 4. I'm also going to put the metronome clicking on 2 and 4. So I'm going to play a minor 2-5-1 phrase here. This is going to be from a PDF ebook that I wrote that's all about minor phrases. Okay, so that ends up feeling pretty hokey. I wouldn't say that that feels good personally. Now I'm going to play that same exact line, but I'm going to articulate the downbeats, especially when the shape of the line is going up. And I'm also going to lean in a lot more to beats 1 and 3. And you'll hear the metronome will also be on beat 1 and 3. So again, it's important to acknowledge that time feel is subjective, but to me, that feels a lot better. So many times when I talk to a developing player who I think needs work on their swing feel, and I talk to them about how they're practicing with the metronome, they'll say that they exclusively practice with the metronome on beats 2 and 4. I think that's no coincidence because I think probably what's happening is they're really developing a lopsided swing feel from focusing so much on beat 2 and 4. I've studied the legends of this music quite a bit, and I've found that everyone from Lester Young to Dexter Gordon and even the modern masters like Michael Brecker use the approach of articulating downbeats when the shape of the line is going up, and oftentimes accenting beats 1 and 3, especially when they're leaning into chord tones on those beats. So with that in mind, here are a couple examples of my interpretations of a couple phrases from Lester Young and Dexter Gordon using this articulation style and leaning into beats 1 and 3 sometimes more than beats 2 and 4. So if you want more info on how I approach articulation in jazz, just check out my video on how to articulate in jazz. Now, the third and last trick here for metronome practicing is also going to be the hardest one to do. And that's going to be putting the metronome on the offbeats instead of the downbeats. Again, this is the hardest trick that we're going to do with metronome practicing today. And this one might be for more advanced players mainly, but I would encourage you to try it because it is surprising how effective this can be. So it's a really simple idea, but hard to do. So just try putting the metronome on the offbeats instead of the downbeats, and you're gonna find this is another great way of really developing your internal time. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm just gonna put the metronome on the upbeat after 4. So the and of 4 or the offbeat after 4, however you wanna think about it. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna play one of the etudes from my most recent Etudes PDF ebook. This one's called Modern Etudes. And this ebook really focuses on the concept of melodic cells and how you can use them in standard song forms, just playing through full sets of chord progressions. Alright guys, so I hope you learned something from this. Make sure to check out that new masterclass on Jazz Lesson Videos. Again, it's called Practicing Standards, and it's a step-by-step approach that I've put together for how I work on jazz standards. And just a reminder to use that coupon code JLV10 for $10 off any masterclass at the jazzlessonvideos.com store. And if you haven't already, make sure to click and subscribe to the YouTube channel and even hit that little bell next to the subscribe button so you can get notifications whenever I release something. And make sure to leave a comment if there's anything that you want to see me cover in future videos. As you know, I'm making a little bit more YouTube content as I'm off tour these days, so would love to know what you'd like me to cover in future videos. All right, thanks for watching guys. I'll see you next time.